Over the last, several months, I wanted to do a COVID catch up because I feel like there's so much stuff that's happened that I need to address, and it's much easier to do it in this format. So basically, we all know that COVID, has caused a lot of issues. We've had the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression. We had the fastest 30% market drop since 1929 in the Great Depression. And, it's been devastating for for broad swaths of the economy. And, when you consider that 70% of Americans, live paycheck to paycheck and are, not able to afford about a $1,000 emergency, it really gives you, the perspective on like how big of a problem this is. Because, unemployment is, a huge issue because it basically means that if people are not able to afford, to push themselves a little bit further than, each paycheck, then that means they're going to miss bills. And when those people miss bills, then that means that they don't have money, discretionary income to spend on other things, which if people aren't buying stuff, then the economy is going to become stagnant because nobody's stimulating it. That's how the American economy works, is we need people at the bottom spending money in order for the assets to raise in price, and therefore the business owners to be able to make money, and therefore employees to be able to make money and to keep them on staff. So this is a huge issue that we, are having to deal with and have been having to deal with. And so far, the government fix has been that, and I say fix very loosely, but the government fix has been a one-time $1,200 stimulus check, a increase on unemployment benefits, which they did through the end of July from $200 per week to $600 per week. And this is a huge issue right now because currently it's been, because the unemployment benefits, the additional unemployment benefits expired at the end of July. They're talking about what are we going to do going forward. And I know it's been shown that, that Trump put out saying that he wanted to have a, extra $400 unemployment benefit, and that he signed a measure to do that. But the problem with it is that it is putting the onus on the states, and the states often don't have enough money for this. And one really good, and I will put all of the links if you want to catch up on this later, but I'll show you right now in the description for afterwards. But let me show you what I'm looking at. But basically, there we are. Awesome. Yeah, so basically when we're looking at this, so here's let me make sure that's perfect. Okay, so basically when we're looking at, okay, cool. Yeah, so basically when we're looking at this, here's a good chart from CNBC showing the CARES Act and what it's done. So the CARES Act is the raising of $400 on top of the $200 that you would normally get from unemployment benefits. And it's showing the difference based on the state that you live in. And so essentially what's happening is you have the original $600, which is the CARES Act. Then you have the $400 that's being proposed, and then you have what it would normally be. This is within each state, and you can see it varies pretty wildly. And more so, I think the thing you can see is that this is a huge disparity. I mean, it's going to be a really big issue if we don't do something in order to, help normal people. And putting the onus on the states is not a great strategy. I mean, especially if you look at, say, like Louisiana, you're looking at under $200 versus almost $800. That's pretty huge. And most economists, at least from what I've seen, they have a very negative view of whether or not states are going to be able to actually afford to do more than the $300 a week that, a lot of them are already committed to. So I feel like this is kind of just passing the buck on to the states, and it only serves to hurt the average person. So I think this is something we really need to pay attention to and be on the lookout for. And if you are someone that's dealing with, unemployment or, in a situation where, you're looking at, needing to use these benefits or similar benefits, definitely be, constantly looking for those because, yeah, we need something soon, and definitely be looking at what politicians in your area are supporting you as an individual, and keep that in mind. And then the other thing that they've been doing is the bailouts. So this is another one to look at. Is basically companies have been doing um, yeah, basically companies have been, we bailed out a lot of companies through the PPE loans, and there's actually a pretty cool tracker that I'm showing here, and it essentially shows the amount that we have given to them and the amount that those companies have given back, and that's been a pretty cool thing. Now you can actually fully see it, but basically the idea is that here's the amount that we gave them. We being the taxpayers gave them through these bailouts, and then here's the amount that they have either paid back or not paid back. And so as you can see, what was a good thing that they did, and they did this in the 2008 crisis as well, was oftentimes when the government would pay out, bail out these companies, they would end up taking an equity ownership stake, and that's how they're getting these additional benefits, is from the equity in that company raising up since then. And when I say that, what I mean is essentially the valuation of that company. So when its stock price comes back up, if the US government owns a specific amount of that company, then it's going to go up by that same percentage. And so this is something that'll be really cool, and I'll have linked in the description for people to see. So I think that's definitely something to check out if you're interested in understanding how those bailouts have worked. Also, one of the most prominent bailouts has been the airline bailouts. And this is something that is definitely personally a thing that I think about regularly, because my father and my brother actually both work for two of the major airlines. And you knew essentially the bailout bill for the airlines. What ended up happening was that they gave a certain amount of money to the airlines with the condition of keeping employees on and not furloughing or firing people through October. And this was something that was very harrowing for knowing people that were in the industry, because the problem that you realize is, oh, well, that means that they're going to, furlough and fire people as soon as it's October. Like it's a very obvious caveat that they put in there for a reason. Now, the positives are that they got government equity in it. So I believe it's the U.S. we own now like 1% stake in Delta and Southwest. Yes, cool. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, so essentially what ends up happening is that we did get a 1% stake in Delta stock at 24 per share, which is a great thing for the future growth of that, because that's a pretty good price for Delta. But the bigger thing we have to keep in mind is, and what a lot of like flight attendant unions and airline pilot unions have been talking about, is that it doesn't do much to help the average person, because those workers are still going to be out of a job. And all this really is going to do, at least historically, all it's going to do is serve to raise the, benefits that holders of that stock, CEOs and other executives that are paid mostly in the shares of that stock, it's going to help them. And yes, we are going to get some benefits because of that equity stake. However, I think it would be much more. I'm very disappointed that Congress, allowed and specifically put in that caveat. I feel like we should keep people on, because airlines at this point in history, they're essentially a utility. Like they're as important as a public utility as any other travel industry. And I think we need to, make sure to support those workers. And so that's been a real issue that I've been thinking about lately. Let's fix this back. Dope. Okay. And then, and so on top of the federal government, there's also been the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is essentially the bank. It's the lender of last resort, is what you would refer to it as. And basically the idea is that the Federal Reserve sets interest rates, which interest rates are the amount that you pay in interest on a loan in order to borrow money. But the Federal Reserve specifically does it for, sets the interest rate for banks to borrow money. What this does is, when they That this means that when they lower federal interest rates, that it lowers the cost of a loan, and when they raise it, it increases the cost of a loan. So what the federal government or what the Federal Reserve has been doing has been lowering the federal interest rates to make money cheaper. That way banks are more likely to loan it out. This is a way of stimulating the economy because there's more liquidity. There's more money available for people to, have loans. And this is why you've seen things like real estate prices go up in areas, even though, unemployment is up. And you would think that, well, how is this possible? Well, it's because there's more money available. Interest rates are low. It's cheaper for people to, sign up a loan. So those that do have a steady job are in a very good position right now. And the Federal Reserve cut interest rates from about 1.75 to 1.5, and then they cut it all the way down to 0.25 to 0.0 or to 0%. And they did that in March, and they plan on keeping that for the next 3 years through 2023. But a lot of economists think that they'll keep it through 2024. This is really important to keep in mind because, so if you have, say, a high interest savings account, and you remember, say, having like 2% or more that you were getting in interest through like Ally or Tab or some other Wealthfront, some other high interest savings account, that percentage rate that you were getting is based on the federal interest rate. So you'll notice that has dropped off to almost nothing now. Well, that's a really big issue because obviously we want to combat inflation. So cutting interest rates down, which then on top of that, they injected 2.3 trillion into the market in March. Those things, all they serve to do is increase the prices of assets because there's more liquidity, and that means that there is more money that is going into those assets. When you consider that you're printing more money, there will likely be increased inflation, then that means that the only people that get left behind are those holding cash in savings accounts. So that's why it's really important to keep in mind that we need to be investing if we're capable, because you're going to get left behind in an inflationary environment, which all paper money is inherently inflationary. That's why it's so important to get started early. So all that considered, going forward, what it seems to me is that inflation is very likely to increase. There are some economists that do think that it will not. However, they're doing that based on a micro scale, at least from what I've seen. And specifically what I mean by that is they're looking at it from the perspective of the price of raw goods in, say, a grocery store or the department store have not risen. And so they're saying that everyday inflation is not occurring. However, when you look at, say, asset prices, and when I say asset prices, I mean, real estate, stocks, those are going up. And it seems to be driven 100% by the Fed. It doesn't seem that there's, we shouldn't have seen you shouldn't see prices in a company, go in a company or the stock market as a whole, going up when we have, 40 million people unemployed a month and a half ago. That doesn't make sense. We shouldn't be like right now. It doesn't seem that we should be near all-time highs in the stock market based on the market itself. That being said, it is being driven by tech giants, which is another thing entirely. And that is why I think, and there's a really good video, I'll link it as well, from Economics Explained that he did, I believe, yesterday on why he thinks that this is going to be, and a lot of economists do, but thinks that this is going to be a K-shaped recovery. So a lot of people, talk about whether it's going to be a V-shaped or a U-shaped or a W-shaped recovery. And essentially all these mean is you're looking at a stock market chart and you're saying, okay, well, it dropped precipitously and then it rises fast. That's, a V. It drops precipitously and then it's like a little iffy. And then finally it comes back up. That's a U, drops, spikes, drops again because everyone panics again, and then finally comes back up. That's a W. A K is where essentially you have the stock market drop and then you have, certain segments of the economy fully recover and other segments of the economy continue to keep going down. And I'm in agreement with him that that's what we're seeing. We're seeing tech and companies that are benefiting from the at-home economy. Those are going up like crazy because they have all this extra liquidity in the market and the low interest rates. They're going to benefit from those Meanwhile, you have companies like in the travel industry that, they're not going to recover until they're able to fully, utilize their, employees, their resources, and run their business fully. So no matter how much liquidity you put in, it's not going to make up the difference between the ones winning in this current economy and the ones losing. It seems to me that we need to do more specific work within those companies, helping them out, because they're going to keep getting left behind. And sadly, the people that are going to get left out the most are their workers, because those are the people that are the most vulnerable in this situation because of the cyclical nature of those companies. And this, of course, then increases the wealth gap in the U.S. I mean, you have people that, including, myself, where it's like, if you're able to even own, stocks, you are so much ahead right now because of the fact that we're looking at, well, one, if you have an emergency fund, you're already far ahead of 70% of Americans, and have far less financial stress. But then two, when you're looking at the ability to own assets right now, that is the key thing, because I think you're going to continue seeing asset prices, that's home prices and stock prices, go up without regard to what's happening with the economy because of those low interest rates. There's just nowhere else to put money. Like, you don't want to put money in bonds. You don't want to put money, hold money in cash. If the Fed's going to pump stuff up, you might as well ride up with it. And that's kind of, I think, what you're seeing from institutional investors. And that's why you're seeing the recovery that has already occurred. And I think that none of these policies that have happened so far, the government or the Fed policies, are going to lower unemployment long term. Yes, it's come down a little bit, but like I said, a lot of these bailout bills, specifically the travel related ones, run out in October. I think we're going to see another drop in, another rise rather, in unemployment. And I don't think that I don't think that this style of quantitative easing and policy is going to do much until the virus is manageable long term for unemployment. And I think this really comes down to the difference between expansionary and contractionary economic policies. So essentially, expansionary economic policies are what we tend to do in a market where that is like a bull market. Expansionary essentially means that we want to lower interest rates, make money cheaper to borrow, cut, regulations, lower taxes, essentially make money easy for people to, to get and to spend. And that, it functionally grows the economy. Whereas contractionary fiscal policy which is far less politically advantageous with most people, is that where we want to, raise taxes, raise taxes in order to redistribute to areas that are more in need. We want to make sure that, we're not focused on necessarily revving the economy as high as we can, but making sure that those at the bottom have enough money to spend and to essentially stimulate the economy to make it through that downtime. Instead, we've seen oftentimes, and I'll do this as a topic in next week's video, we'll see companies like BlackRock, and other like vulture capitalists, as they would be called by many, come in and take advantage of these distressed assets when they're at a low price, at the behest of normal people that are getting left behind in these expansionary fiscal policies. As for lessons that we as individuals can learn from this, is that, it's so important to have an emergency fund. That's the number one thing that you should do after you pay off debt that's over like 4%. If you have, like 2-3% interest rate debt, it may not be that important for you to prioritize, in my opinion, over getting an emergency fund. That being said, you need to talk to a specific financial advisor about that. But essentially, if it's, lower than about what you can get in bonds, there's not much of a reason to prioritize it over getting an emergency fund first, because it's far worse to not have an emergency fund, get in a dire situation, and then have to take in high interest loans, whether in the form of credit cards or personal loans, just to save 2%. It's, in my opinion, there's nothing better than having an emergency fund for your like financial and mental like well-being, because it'll manage your stress a lot. And then, make sure that you're investing, because once you have an emergency fund, you want to make sure that you are putting money in assets, because the reality is that the people that are writing laws, the people that are doing this policy, that's what they're doing. And so they're going to, they're going to essentially make it easier for themselves. So you're going to have to be a part of that if you want to not get left behind, sadly. And then as far as like jobs, you want to keep in mind when you're looking, if you're someone who's in school or you are someone who's at a job that, is not your long-term career plan, you want to make sure that you're looking at it from the perspective of, okay, well, what is this job going to do for me? I think it's really important. And and I'll do this as well as a topic in the future, but it's really important because like I, as an example, work in a job where I work for, a company that essentially is, we're like essentially a nonprofit, unbiased third party that vets contracts for NASA. So my job is very stable. It's not cyclical or consumer based. And I think that's something we really need to focus on, because in the way our economy in the US is currently set up, it heavily, like it hurts people in cyclical industries very, very sharply, because we don't do enough contractionary fiscal policy to help those people. And so I think it's really important to focus on, even if, say, you look at like me going to school as an engineer, I was looking at, companies like Amazon or, SpaceX or Tesla, or these really cool company, Google, these cool companies that have, that make the most money, that give a lot of cool perks. And, when I thought about what I wanted to do for my work, for my future as an employee or, just as a person, was I wanted to have the most work-life balance, most freedom that I could have. And I didn't want to have the stress of whether or not my job was going to be there based on specific contracts, occurring. And so that's why I chose what I did. And I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind for long-term planning, because recessions will always hit cyclical industries harder. So if you're in one now, more power to you, and good luck. And hopefully it doesn't get much worse, but or even look and see, maybe there are options outside that have the same skill sets, but with a company with a little bit different economic factors. And cool, that is the end of that one. If you enjoyed this clip, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out the full live version of the Wealth for 99 podcast, where we talk finance, economics, and public policy from a working class perspective. We'll see you there.